Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly Bible reading recap. We got Andrew here. We got me. I'm Mike. We are talking about First Kings, the whole thing. And then, as you can see on the screen, I hope, up through chapter 16 of Second Kings. So a lot of reading this time. I hope you're able to stay with us. How about you, Andrew?
I'm with us.
Okay.
I'm with us. It felt longer to me,
Okay.
but I'm with us.
There was a lot going on.
Yeah.
A lot of kings, a lot of sort of small actions, but then there's some big arcs that kind of followed certain things, and then there's a lot of jumping around. So it might have been a little hard to follow.
A lot of names that just are not super familiar to me or maybe to our other readers. That's always a challenge when you're encountering these people and you're like, you're reading about Moses, you're reading about David. It's like, I know these guys, I know the stories.
Right.
You start reading about Jehoshaphat and
Right.
Jeroboam and
Right.
Ahaziah.
Right.
It's a little different.
Once you get past Solomon and Rehoboam, you kind of there's a couple of big ones that we remember. Ahab,
Yeah.
we'll get to, and then and then sometimes you don't get very much about them. It's
Right.
almost like reading Judges. Well, we get three or four chapters on Samson, and we get one sentence on Shamgar.
Yeah.
And there's some of that in here too.
A little bit. So basically what our text is today, just to give a quick recap of what we've read, we've got, we start with David. He's a shell of a man, very old and about to die, and that gives rise to the kingship of Solomon. And so the first story is really about Solomon's reign. After Solomon's reign, he's going to do some good things, but after his reign, his son Rehoboam is going to cause just this division in the kingdom. There's going to be this big split between Rehoboam and Jeroboam.
But that goes back to Solomon, right?
Sure.
Solomon created this situation.
A lot of the seeds of that are sown prior. And then we pretty much get these two tracks. We've got the northern kingdom of Israel. We've got the southern kingdom of Judah. And we're just trying to bounce back and forth between these.
That's it, right? It bounces back and forth, and so you get in the year of this king became king, and then you read a little bit, and then it's you go back to the other side, and then in the year of that king, then this guy becomes king, and it can be a little bit tricky to follow.
Yeah, some of this, we maybe should have shared this with people before they started reading it, but
I think people need to find out things for themselves.
Some of this might be easy to read if there are plenty of chronological guides online, and some of that might be helpful if you're the kind that need like a visual representation of this. There are things you can find online.
I mean, we have a timeline hanging in this room of that very thing, and that's a good idea because you can get it on one sheet, one view on your screen if you want to look at it that way. That's a great idea.
Yeah. So a lot of bouncing back and forth. We've got the northern tribes, we've got the southern tribes. Some of the characters that really become important in this story, though, like where the story kind of camps out, are guys that may be familiar to a lot of us, prophets, Elijah and Elisha.
Right.
And, of course, Elijah interacts with Ahab a lot. We may talk about some of those stories. Elisha is going to be kind of following the footsteps of Elijah. But those are some of the big names we get.
They're almost the two keys on which everything else follows, right?
Yeah. And I think we mentioned in last week's video, this book would have been a part of, in the Hebrew tradition, it would have been part of the prophets.
The prophets.
And part of that is because these prophets play such a big role in the story. So the things Elijah's doing, the things Elisha's doing, it's all sort of, it's the connection between the kings and God. And so that's sort of the mode of communication here. So let's do this. Give me your first impressions. I mean, there's a long span of story here. What did you find interesting?
The thing that jumped out at me most of all was that almost let's say most of this entire section is taking place in Israel, which is the 10 tribes that were separated and are the 10 tribes and the kings that never do what's right.
Yeah.
And yet the story seems to mostly take place there. And we get some interaction with Judah, but after the split, not a lot. And not a lot of prophets, at least recorded, doing anything. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Elijah and Elisha are both prophets primarily to Israel.
Right, and they live in Israel, and everybody knows who they are, and they work in Israel. They each do a whole bunch of different things. Some of them really, really big. Some of them really, really small. You know, Elisha pulls an axe head out of the river. But everyone knew who they were. The kings knew who they were, and yet the nation as a whole, the northern nation, never really gets the message.
Yeah. And maybe that's why so many prophets are going to the north. Maybe it's just sort of trying to break it into their heads that, listen to God.
I think something like that.
I do think that it's interesting that the kings of Judah, there are several stories where the kings of Judah are interacting with the kings of Israel, and they're saying, let's get a prophet of
Right.
God in on this.
Right.
And
There's a couple of great ones.
the kings of Israel always sort of have this, I don't want to hear from that prophet. I don't want to hear from this prophet because he never tells me what I want to hear. And so these prophets of God are not telling them what they want to hear.
Right.
They're telling what they need to hear.
Right. Maybe that's the point, right? That's why we're in Israel, or the lens is focused on Israel, because not that Judah was perfect. They had their
Sure.
own problems, but this is part of God's character and his mercy and his grace, and he's trying to get this message across. And then we're seeing this real interaction between people who just really don't want to do what God wants them to do, but they know they should.
Yeah.
And then so here's the prophet saying, I told you.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I noticed as I was reading this, it's sort of a theme that's going to track through the whole story here, and it's going to plague Israel, the northern tribes of Israel, until their ultimate demise. Jeroboam is the first king of Israel, and he becomes really the king that all future kings of Israel are compared against. It's always like he did just like Jeroboam did, or he didn't do what
Very
Jeroboam
much like David
did.
on the opposite side.
That's right. That's right. But the one thing Jeroboam is remembered for is, well, ironically, Jeroboam was handpicked by God to be king. Like he had every, he falls in line with guys like Saul and David, like handpicked by God, anointed for that role. But then the one thing he did was, when he realized that the people might leave him, is he sets up these altars at Dan and Bethel, and sets up golden calves there, which should remind us maybe of some other Old Testament stories we've heard about people who, set up a golden calf.
Right. It seems like that's a bad thing.
Ill-advisedly. And one of the things that I just thought was really interesting about that, as I was reading, was when Jeroboam does that, he says almost the same thing that Aaron says when he set it up at Mount Sinai, which was, these are your gods that brought you out of Egypt. And that distortion of the religion of the Jews is going to plague them forever. He's not saying these are different gods. He's saying this is your God.
Right.
He's representing God in the wrong way.
Right.
That struck me, and that comes up again and again and again.
Right. And again, as you said, he was chosen by God. I'm going to give you these 10 tribes, and if you will follow me,
That's right.
I will make your throne, last forever over there.
Just like David.
And he just doesn't. But
Yeah.
it's a pure political move. And I think that's, again, these guys are they're getting into politics. They're worried about power. They don't really care or want to do what God says, even though all of these guys, I think without fail, know. They've been told, and they know better. They just won't.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite king?
I mean, favorite bad. I love Ahab. Ahab is so ridiculously dumb. And he was king for a long time. God put up with him for so long. And so he deals with Elijah. And just he's so ridiculous, I think, as a king. So
Yeah.
I think, from that standpoint, he's the one that in all these readings always stands out to me. It's just like,
Yeah.
come on. What? How can you not get the message?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is interesting with Ahab. I wonder how much of that would be true of the other kings there's so much
if we
written
had
about
more.
him,
If
right?
we had more,
His character is fleshed
Yeah.
out more than most of them, if not all of them.
And I think that's probably because there was a lot of the same.
Yeah.
Kind of like Judges, we're not going to get
Right.
the story of everyone. And I think you're probably right. I think that's probably pretty common with the one. I think
Yeah.
the ones we do see basically all are like this.
Yeah. Now, I will say this. One of the things about Ahab that people might be interested in knowing, because Ahab is a major character in this whole plot, Ahab's story is different than Jeroboam's, because Jeroboam made attempts to worship Yahweh, but worship him falsely or in a way that God didn't ordain. Ahab just goes off the deep end and surrounds himself with Baal worship.
Ahab
But by the way,
becomes the worst.
I say it Baal.
Baal.
It's not Baal. It's Baal.
The guy reading my Bible says Baal.
He's more than welcome to be wrong about that. That's fine.
I'm just saying. The guy reading mine says Baal.
All right.
But if I had to pick another one, it would be Jehu. Comes
Jehu.
along toward the end of our reading.
That's right.
He's just like wild and crazy and does almost everything God said.
Yeah.
And kind of, he's the one that actually ends Ahab's line, because that was prophesied that Ahab's line would completely end. There would be no more males left. And it's Jehu, who's several generations later comes in and he does it. But he's kind of like this, like all or nothing guy.
Yeah.
And then do we have time to, are we going to talk about, he kills all in Israel and Judah. And we got to remember, they're kind of intermarried and intertwined in ways they aren't supposed to be.
That's right.
And so he kills them all. And then he goes back to Israel and he says, Ahab worshiped Baal or Baal a little. I'm going to worship him a lot.
Yeah.
And he says, all of the priests and prophets of Baal have to meet me at the temple of Baal. And then he kills them all.
Yes.
And then his guys carry all his junk out of the temple and they burn it all down. And it says he turned it into a latrine, and it still is to this day.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't perfect, but.
Yeah. He comes in. There's a lot of prophecy in this. Ahab's told your whole family's gonna die.
But that's another thing that happens over and over and over, right? These kings are told, you're so bad, your whole line's gonna end, so someone else takes over. And this happens about 5 times.
Jeroboam is told the same thing.
Jeroboam.
Is it Baasha is told the same thing? All these guys, you did wrong.
Yep.
I would have let you be king.
Right.
But you did wrong. A lot of emphasis on Israel. A lot of emphasis on Ahab specifically.
What about you? Favorite?
What are we talking about? Favorite?
We were talking about favorite kings. But
kings.
You gotta.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now because there were so many names. Have we gotten through the story of Jehoshaphat yet? Because Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, is remarkable to me in a lot of ways.
He's tied in with Ahab also.
He's tied in with Ahab.
There's a lot of J names. So
there are.
He's
confusing. Also tied in with Ahab's son.
Yes.
And he makes some really ill-advised political alliances with those kings, and yet he also seeks God in some really noteworthy ways. So if you just sort of skimmed over Jehoshaphat in Kings,
go back and
read Jehoshaphat, because I'm always kind of partial to his character. By the way, there's a prayer that Jehoshaphat offers, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head if it's mentioned in both. There may be more in Chronicles about Jehoshaphat, so we might run into him again. But his prayer is beautiful, and the way he seeks God in that prayer is pretty remarkable.
Do you want to talk about that incident with Jehoshaphat and Ahab and?
Okay, well, so this is one of my favorite stories, probably in all of the Bible. There's this story in our reading where Ahab and Jehoshaphat intend to go to war. It's one of these alliances that they make with each other. And they intend to go to war, and Ahab is just all for it. He's like, I'm ready to go. And Jehoshaphat kind of holds him back and says, let's inquire of the Lord. And so Ahab gathers all these prophets who all, are basically glorified yes men. They're going to say whatever Ahab wants them to say.
Yeah, that's what happens first, right?
Yeah.
Like he says, yeah, we got prophets, and all 400 prophets show up, and they start prophesying. And some of it gets really interestingly specific, right? About the horn. The guy makes the iron horns, and he says, "Go!" And this is what you're going to do to the Aramaeans, right? They're fighting Syria.
But Jehoshaphat insists. He's like, no, there's a better prophet we can call.
Like, isn't there a prophet of God we can talk to?
Yeah,
I love that. That is one of my favorite lines.
And Ahab knows there is. He knows who Jehoshaphat wants. But Ahab's stance is basically, I know he's going to tell me something I don't want to hear, so I'm not gonna have him on.
Isn't that curious, though? He knows he's a man of God. That's what I was saying earlier. These guys know that there are prophets from God, and they know who they are. They're not hiding. They're
Yeah.
out there, and he knows. Oh, he's not going to say anything good about me.
Yeah.
Wonder why?
Yeah, imagine. So anyway, as the story progresses, the prophet called is, we expect it to be Elijah because Elijah has so many interactions with Ahab.
Right.
It's not Elijah. It's another prophet whose name is Micaiah. And Micaiah comes along, and basically the prophets stop him before he gets there and says, like, please just tell him what he wants to hear. Like, we can all go home. It'll be great, you know. And when Micaiah gets there, he actually does that. He says, okay, yeah,
go ahead.
go fight. You'll be fine. And Ahab realizes that he's stringing him along. But the best part of this story, and the whole reason I bring it up, is this is one of the few stories in the Bible where we kind of get the curtain peeled back and get to see what's happening in heaven, behind the scenes. It's sort of like, you know, you get to get a look in behind the curtains. And basically there's this scene where God is sitting on his throne surrounded by heavenly counselors, and he says, how are we gonna, it's Ahab's time to die. How are we gonna entice him to go into battle and die? This angel of the Lord says, well, I'll go deceive him. I'll go trick him into going. And so this spirit from God, from the heavenly realm, entered into these prophets and convinced them to say that he should go. And it's just a striking story that we don't often get those glimpses,
Right.
and it's
There's,
incredible.
There's only a couple of those kind
Yeah.
of things, and so some people have a hard time with this kind of
Sure.
thing. But it's like you said, it's peeling back just a little bit,
Yeah.
and to see a little bit about how God operates. I think so. We need to be careful, right, when we say, "Well, God did this."
Yeah.
And actually, we see this a lot in this book. It's say this king did this, but he didn't actually do it. He just ordered it or had his minions do it. Like the whole beginning where Solomon builds the temple. Solomon did this.
Yeah.
Like he didn't touch it, right? He paid
right.
for it, and I think probably a lot of that same thing with God did this, or he whatever, he's sending out these minions, these messengers,
Yeah.
which I think we could say are angels.
Yeah, we get this story. I think it's 1 Kings 22 is this story we're talking about. If you're curious for some of those other peeks behind the curtain, Job has sort of one of those where
Beginning of Job.
you kind of see God talking to these people, these beings, I'll say, in the spiritual realm. Just fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating to think about. And we don't often pause and reflect on them, I don't think, as often as maybe we should.
It is really interesting, but I think the whole interaction is, funny. We were talking about humor the other days, or humor, and again, Micaiah's like, yeah, go ahead. And Ahab knows he's lying because he knows.
Yeah. Well, and we all know as readers, if we're reading this story, we know where Ahab stands with God, and we know what the prophets are going to tell him to do. So anyway, there's a lot of fascinating things in here. I don't know what are our key takeaways? There's so much story here that we could talk about, and maybe we shouldn't dive into all of them in great detail.
Well, we can't. Unfortunately, we can't, or we'd be here for 3 hours.
We could.
That's
we don't know if
well,
people would be with us
you
for those
wouldn't
3
be here
hours.
For 3 hours. That's one. Of course, there's all these kings. Most of them are bad. All of them in Israel are bad. I think Jehu is another interesting king. So Ahab takes up a big chunk of it in terms of Israel, and Jehoshaphat takes up a big chunk of it for Judah. And then later on, it's Jehu. So Jehu is about the third or fourth one where God has said, okay, we're going to get rid of everybody else. And Jehu actually is tasked with getting rid of all of Ahab's descendants. There's a bunch of them. Another one was where he had 70 sons and this kind of thing. And again, Jehu comes along and does it. He does it in Israel and Judah because they had intermarried. And then again, I feel like we talked about this before, but I guess it was earlier. He takes all of the people and has them kill all the prophets of Baal and has them killed. So, guy that stands out, but still not really doing what God wanted him to do. He left Jeroboam's idols in Dan and Bethel, but he stood out too as a guy who kind of started down the right path, but then kind of fell off the path. But the other guys are Elijah and Elisha, right? Those are the two big names out of this whole, other than Solomon. those are the big names out of this whole. Those are the prophets. Usually, I think we think of the prophets as Isaiah and Jeremiah and the guys we call them the writing prophets, right?
Yeah.
These guys didn't write anything, but there's a lot written about them.
Yeah.
And so their interaction over multiple kings stands out.
We haven't even really touched on the stories of Elijah.
No.
Yeah. I mean, his fear, his anxiety, because, Jehu comes along at the end, as you mentioned, kills all the prophets of Baal. That's a direct answer
Right.
to what Jezebel and Ahab had been doing to the
Right.
prophets of Yahweh.
Right. But Elijah had all those prophets of Baal killed too.
Yeah.
And then a couple generations later, there's hundreds of them left.
Yeah.
That was another thing that maybe shouldn't go here, but you keep reading about the prophets of God or the sons of the prophets kind of all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. And like toward the end of this reading, Elisha, hey Elisha, we're running out of room here. We want to move over here. He's like, okay. That's where the axe head things happen because they're that. I find that interesting that this is in Israel again, and so we have a group of men who are prophets of God or sons of the prophets, and I don't know exactly what all they do. They're certainly not named or doing anything like Elijah. We have Elijah, Elisha, and Micaiah, I think, are the only named prophets here. There might be another one.
Yeah, those are certainly the major
It's just kind of
story
interesting.
ones, yeah.
And so they have their little groups of prophets. Baal has its groups of prophets. They all have their groups of prophets.
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't take long for this to rise back up. That's another thing we see, this same pattern, right? We saw it in Judges. They did evil in the sight of the Lord. That always involved idolatry, which led them down all these other paths. And then the problems would happen, and God would save them with the judge. Now the kings are doing it. Same problem, same process, except it'll usually be a prophet that comes along and says, hey, this is what's going to happen. And a lot of times in Israel's case, it's not even because they were doing right. God just says, yeah, I'm not going to kill you all right now. I'm going to save you. There's a number of those incidents. There's a number of incidents in this, especially with Elisha, where there's these huge armies, and then God goes, nah, right? And one of them is Elisha sees them, or they invade. It's the Arameans almost every time. So it's Syria, right? And they come in and they invade Israel. They invade Samaria. Samaria's under siege. There's cannibalism and all this stuff, which, again, we've talked about before, is one of those things that God said would happen. If you disobey me, people will eat their children.
Yeah.
It's, again, horrifying. And that happens, we think of that happening later to Judah, but it happened to Israel too here. And so they get invaded, and then they get, God's one time, God just turned them all blind. And so the king's like, well, what do I do? Elisha says, I just feed them all and send them home. That I was thinking that sounds an awful lot like love your neighbor or Romans 12, right? That kind of thing. And then there's another case where they came and they're besieging the city again, and people are eating each other, and it says God made them afraid and they ran away, and then the guys with leprosy found everything. And I love that. That was to me a really interesting story, because I was thinking that's so human nature, right? These four lepers who are outcasts, so they're literally outside of the city while it's being besieged. They go into camp. They basically go, well, we could die here, we could die there. They go to camp, they find it empty, and they start just eating all the food and hiding all the gold. And they did this 2 or 3 times. They go to a tent and they hide all the stuff. And after about the 3rd time, they go, this probably isn't very nice. We're not really acting right. We should go tell the king. And then, of course, the people come out, and this is all part of the prophecy that, we get these weird numbers, like a head of a donkey costs 34 ounces of silver or some such. And then Elisha says, now, tomorrow everything's going to be fine. And just these, big armies and big events where God just turns the tide, not because Israel repented. That was sort of the signal we got in Judges, that Israel almost never repents, but God saves them anyway and protects them anyway.
Yeah. Patience, long-suffering on God's part. One of the things that, as you were talking there, I was thinking about some of the prophecies we saw in Deuteronomy. You mentioned the horrific cannibalism, eating of your children, sort of things in the siege, moments of siege. One of the other things that strikes me is in Deuteronomy, there were some specific warnings about the way the kings would behave and how they should behave. And one of the grave warnings was don't accumulate horses for yourselves because the Egyptians accumulate horses and you don't want to be like the Egyptians.
Right.
You just left the Egyptians, right? And so that was always something to, maybe we should keep an eye on. Do these kings accumulate horses? And in our reading earlier on, before we get to the divided kingdom, one of the things Solomon does right off the bat is he marries Pharaoh's daughter and starts accumulating horses. And that's really a turning point, I think, for the kingdom as a whole, because we've got this king now who is the son of David, who's acting just like Pharaoh. And this is supposed to be a kingdom that is nothing like the Egyptians, and yet they're starting to do everything like the Egyptians. And as we go further down, it's just going to become worse and worse in terms of they're enslaving themselves to what they were freed from out of Egypt. They're going back into Egypt.
This is exactly what their forefathers wanted, right?
That's
When
right.
they complained in the
Let's
wilderness.
go back to Egypt.
Let's go back. Everything was great in Egypt.
Yeah.
That's not unusual. I think everybody wants to be like whoever came before because they seemed better or wealthy. Americans always wanted to be like the British, in our history.
Yeah.
As soon as we got money, we wanted to look and act like the British or whoever. Do we have time to talk about Solomon a little bit? I know we're jumping around, but
We got a little bit of time.
we got a little bit of time.
What do you want to say about Solomon? Choose wisely.
It struck me.
You get
I
it?
will choose wisely.
You get it?
I get it because
See?
he chose wisely.
wisely.
He chose wisdom and understanding. God gave him that and more.
Yeah.
There was some language in there where this may be to David more than Solomon, where David wants to build a temple and God says no, but I'm going to raise up for you a son who's going to be this great king and he's going to build my temple. And I just keep thinking, like, there's some messianic language in here.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it's Solomon, but it's also Jesus and this temple, the church and the body. And I find that kind of stuff really, really fascinating. And a lot of prophecy has this kind of immediate meaning and then a messianic meaning. And I think that's missed a lot when you're reading this stuff, especially when you're reading it in small pieces. I think, again, one of the benefits of reading in these big, large chunks and doing it more than once, right? Doing it over and over is where I think you can start to see the triple meaning of this prophecy, or maybe the double meaning is the better way, right? There's an immediate thing, and then there's almost always some kind of messianic hint to it.
Yeah.
We don't catch them all. The New Testament speakers and writers have to tell us, they point us, hey, we're fulfilling that thing, and it may not have made sense at the time, but some of these we can totally see, and I just found that really interesting. So he literally builds a temple, but then that temple gets destroyed, and then the Lord comes, another son of David, the son of David, the seed of Abraham, who then builds the kingdom, the temple that way.
Well, Solomon fails in points. He succeeds in some, but he's not the ideal king that we're waiting for.
You would think he should have been, right?
Yeah, especially after the promise to David. But I think there's a sense in which, as we read through these kings, especially the line of Judah, but maybe even the line of Israel to some extent, I think with every king we're supposed to sort of go, is this the guy? Is this the one we've been waiting for? And every one of them fails in some way. And then Jesus comes along in the New Testament, of course, and right off the bat, the first pages of the New Testament, this is the son of David, right? He has the right to the throne. He's the one who can serve as king. And he's crowned as king, even if in a mocking way at the end of the Gospels. He has his robe on him.
Right.
And then some of the declarations about Jesus, he's not just a king. He's not just the king of the Jews. He's the king of all kings. And I think there's probably a really practical sense in which Jesus rules over the rulers of the earth, even modern rulers. There's also a sense in which you look back at all the kings that we've read about in the Bible, and he's the one that fits the bill that none of them could.
Right. So read this with that in mind, right?
Absolutely.
There's always looking forward. I think whatever we're reading, we need to be doing that. Looking forward, where is this, we're not necessarily going to say is Jesus on this page, but where is this going? Why is this here? I think we've talked about this before. Why is all this information here? Why do we have all these stories in these Kings? I think Kings is a lot like Judges, where you get this cycle and you get a handful of bigger stories and a bunch of small stories just to see this is what people do, this is what God does, and here's the difference. And there's still hope, so there's future, and we're still looking in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I think this would be a good time to transition to this. If you want to keep looking for kingly references and things that point to Jesus and the Kings, you're in luck, because we get to finish up 2 Kings.
That's right.
And then we jump right into the books of Chronicles, which is going to be retelling a lot of the stories of the Kings. So let's talk for just a few minutes to sort of set up, because our reading next week is the remainder of 2 Kings and then the book of 1 Chronicles.
Right.
So that's where we're going to get.
So you're going to get you're going to feel like you're getting a lot of repeat.
Yes.
But Andrew's going to explain why that is, but it's for a reason.
Yeah. So we need to say just a few things to prepare you for this reading. I like to start in this way, and feel free to jump in and add if you see anything lacking here. But when we read the Old Testament, there are really two stories that we're reading. It's one history, but it's told from two perspectives. If you start reading in the book of Joshua, and you read all the way through 2 Kings, you've read, really you could even go back to Genesis through 2 Kings, you've read the story of Israel. And so we're going to finish up that story here this next week, which is kind of exciting. When you go to Chronicles, 1 Chronicles chapter 1, you actually start all the way back at the beginning of the story. In fact, let me just prep everybody. 1 Chronicles is going to be very, very boring for several chapters, because it's going to be a lot of chronology. And all that's doing, it's going to be a lot of names, but it's going to be ones we're familiar with in great part, because it's like the writer of Chronicles just like pushed the fast forward button on the history of Israel to get us up to the point where David is king. Like, that's all he's done. And so 1 Chronicles through Nehemiah, maybe even through Esther, if we want to go that far, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, yeah, because that gets us to the end of the histories. That is the second telling of this history of God's people. And so we're going to kind of get the end of the first telling and the beginning of the second telling here in this next week's reading. So if you're ever sitting there wondering, like, well, why are these, it's telling me the same stories about the same kings. It's because they're written from a different perspective. I don't know if you want to share some about maybe what that perspective is.
You're on a roll. Go
how
ahead.
Kings is different than Chronicles. All right. I think it'll be fair just to say this. Kings has a very, very negative outlook.
Yes.
Like, it's bad in Kings. And it's been bad since Judges. The Judges were terrible in a lot of ways. I mean, they did good things. They led God's people towards freedom from their oppressors. Those were all good. But their character was flawed.
Right.
Every one of them. Samuel had all these flawed leaders. And the Kings is the same. 1st and 2nd Kings is the same. Chronicles is going to have a much more optimistic outlook on where things are going. And so I would encourage you to think about the things we've read in Kings. And as we get into Chronicles, ask yourself, how is this different than what we read in Kings? And I think what you'll find is, on the whole, it's a lot more positive. And I hope we'll bring some of that out as we read it. Highlight maybe some things that, this wasn't mentioned in Kings.
There are still some bad things or negative
Certainly.
things there, but
Certainly.
I do think, coming from a later period of time, that there's a focus to be more encouraging about the future. Our past was bad, and it has these problems, but look at all the good that we've done. And because I think people do tend to focus on the negative.
Yeah.
We get stuck in the negative, and just think about your thoughts about history in general, or American history, or what have you. Focus on the bad. Sometimes we forget about the good, and I do feel like that's part of what they're doing. It's not a total, it's not overworking history or rewriting history. They're just trying to focus on different things.
Sure.
So it'll come across as sounding different.
Some of that maybe when it was written, when these books were written, It seems like Kings was probably written from captivity. And the reason I say that is we'll see in this next week that the book ends in captivity.
Right.
And so there may be a sense that we're kind of looking back going, how did we get here? Like, where did we go wrong? And so all of the things in Kings is just sort of like, well, this is where you went wrong, you know?
Right.
Ahab, like what were you thinking? Whereas Chronicles actually ends after they've returned home from captivity. And so there's a more hopeful outlook. You know, well, what do we do now that we're back in our land? I'll probably leave it at that unless you have something else to add. But
No,
I think
that's good.
just be on the lookout for some of those differences. It's not just the same stories again. There's a reason both of these books are here. And it's important for us to think about that.
I got one other thing that I just remembered and I was looking at it here.
Okay.
just these layers that
Yeah.
happen. So when you read through Kings, it's Syria or Aram is pretty much the bad guy. But even Elisha and Elijah talk to those guys, and they work with those kings, and so on. And again, God is working with everybody.
God anoints
But
some of those kings.
right at the end of chapter 16, there's this new king Ahaz, and he's bad. And he now meets the king of Assyria. So Assyria is the next kingdom up. If you know your history, they're the ones that are going to actually swallow up Israel.
Yeah.
But just to kind of show, and I think we saw this in Judges, things went from bad to worse to worse to worse, and we're seeing that here. So we had all these kings worshiping Baal,
Thank you. Thank you.
worshiping Baal, and then we had this thing with Jehu, but they're going to quickly come back. Right, Jehu kills them all. Elisha killed them all. Jehu kills them all. They're going to come back. They always do. But Ahaz goes to Damascus, which is the capital of Syria, so their hereditary enemy. That Ahaz is the king of Judah, right? But he sees this altar that they had made in Damascus, and he sends the plans for it back to the priest in Jerusalem, and they build this whole new amazing altar, and they park it right there in the courtyard. And, you know, it's right at the end of chapter 16, and they do the burnt offerings and all this kind of stuff. But it just kind of like how far, you know, it wasn't like they just sort of left the temple alone and forgot about it. That happened a few times. But they're actually now, like toward the end of this history, they are now desecrating it. And again, this is where the history goes. This is one of the reasons they're going to get into captivity. But just this idea that I like that altar better than the one God made, and it's bigger and golder or whatever. And it's just that kind of stuff. Just it seems so unreal, and yet it's actually happened.
Yeah.
This little tidbit where I'm going to do it better than God.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it bigger and better than what God asked for.
Well, and we look at it on the pages in the Bible and say, how could they?
How could they do that?
And how many times do we in our life say,
Yeah.
I can do it better than God?
Yeah. It's crazy. What else? We got the next reading. We talked about that. I think that's a lot.
I think we've done enough.
Done enough damage?
I think we've done enough damage. So here's what we need you to do. Like and subscribe. Smash that like button.
Or if you're old, click.
Just click it. That's fine. Tap it.
That works too.
Whatever
If you're watching
it
it on
takes.
TV, I don't know how you do it, but there's a way to do it.
We assume. We're making this up.
We
as
really,
go.
really, really want you to add some comments. Ask
Absolutely.
questions, disagree, agree. Most of the stuff's just kind of historical stuff, but we obviously can't cover everything. So if something specific comes up that we didn't cover, we'd love to cover that. Again, our intent would be to make, if we get enough of those, to make
Sure.
some other videos that are just that.
Or just share what you found interesting. We've shared with you what we thought was interesting. What in the reading did you find fascinating? What did you find meaningful? What application did you derive from it? So we're just here trying to help each other grow, trying to help each other figure out how to read the Bible and be in it. So that's what we're doing, and we're grateful that you are following along with us. So I guess until next time,
Until next time.
we'll talk to you later, guys.